This is Glass City Humanist on WAKT Radio. This is a show talking about topics of the day from a secular and humanist value perspective. Here is your host, Douglas Berger.
We talk about the recent visit of punk legend Henry Rollins and what he had to say about families. We look at the First Amendment violations around the release time religious education classes in public schools in Ohio, and we try to make sense of the current conflict going on in the Middle East.
Glass City Humanist is an outreach of the secular humanists of Western Lake Erie, building community with reason and compassion for a better tomorrow. Views expressed on the Glass City Humanist are not necessarily those of Sholey or WAKT Radio.
The first thing I want to talk about is the other night I attended a spoken word event. The first time I've ever been to a spoken word event. And basically that's a concert where somebody talks. And it happened to be the punk rocker, singer, raconteur, sometime actor, comedian, Henry Rollins. He was formerly the lead singer of the punk band Black Flag, and he's well known for that. If you go on to the YouTube and Google Black Flag, you'll see him in all his glory as a punk rocker. He used to really get into it, beat up people and prance around with no shirt on and screaming and the whole 9 yards. And he was doing he was on tour, his spoken word tour, no music, it was just him talking at the Maumee Indoor Theater in Maumee, beautiful Maumee, Ohio. And I had never been in the Maumee Indoor Theater, and it's a very nice facility, well maintained, clean. You know, they really take good care of it. The parking wasn't that great. Maumee is in the process of transitioning some of their roadways, and so they've got a lot that's torn up. But I lucked out and I was able to find a parking spot close by, and enjoyed myself immensely. Henry spoke for 2 hours, more than 2 hours straight, standing at the stage, and I took a picture of him, and I'll show the picture up. And so that's how he stood the entire time. Didn't take a break, didn't take a sip of water, didn't sit down, didn't take any long pauses. It was constant stories. And I am I admit that I like punk rock. I've been a fan of punk rock since the late 70s, early 80s, when I first heard Blondie and heard about CBGBs in New York and the Ramones and things like that. And then of course, then you had the Sex Pistols, which were really, pretty famous or infamous, as it were, and the Clash and things like that. I really, really got into punk rock. Didn't care for the violence so much or the mosh pits, and I was probably too young to get into clubs at that time, but I did listen to the music and really enjoyed it. So I really wanted to see Henry Rollins, and so I'm glad I went, and he told a lot of stories. One of my favorites that he told is he pretty much gave his whole entire life story, from when he was born till when his mother passed away last year, and it included how he got into Black Flag and the whole 9 yards. He did not have a happy childhood. His mom and his dad were both alcoholics, and they abused him, and I guess he was sexually assaulted at some point during his youth, and he, and she was probably might have been bipolar or something, and she'd have these attacks, and he would get upset about it, and she eventually married another guy who was the total complete opposite of her. And they were together until they both passed away recently. And so he really had a very strange relationship with his family. And in fact, at one point in the story, he tells that, he graduated from high school in 1979 and he wanted out of there. He didn't want to have anything to do with any of those people ever again. And essentially he didn't. His stepsisters contacted him, let him know that his stepdad had died and they were going to spread his ashes. He didn't go to that. And his mother eventually passed away, and they had her cremated and invited him to come and spread her ashes, and he didn't want to do that. They even offered to give him her ashes, and he refused. He really had some major issues with his mother. And there's a lot of people that are like that. One of my favorite shows growing up as a kid was the Brady Bunch. And even though the kids weren't all, they were all half siblings, and it was a blended family. People thought that that's how families should be. We still have religious conservatives who believe that's how families should be: mom and dad and kids. And it's not like that. I didn't grow up that way. I have friends of mine that didn't grow up that way. In fact, when he was talking about his mother's ashes, that reminded me of a friend of mine, a real close friend of mine, who had almost the same kind of thing with her mother's ashes. She didn't want them, because they had a terrible relationship. But a lot of times you have a terrible relationship with your family, and you're still your family. It's their blood. They're related to you, and as much, and hey, people cut off family members all the time. I know people in my family have done that. They've cut off people. The other day, a member of my family had an interview in a newspaper for something that they did. It was about cancer, and they talked about how their mother had passed away from cancer. Well, this family member's mother didn't pass away from cancer. Her stepmother passed away from cancer. But because she had a bad relationship with her biological mother, she just kind of like dismissed her. And so families are like that. It's not, people talk about nuclear families. I did an interview for another podcast with somebody who was taught about restoring the nuclear family. That doesn't exist. That's not something that we should pine for. Basically what it is families should be happy. They should be together because they want to be together. And if they don't want to be together, they shouldn't be forced to stay together. If some of these religious conservatives want to do away with like divorce, no fault divorce, and they want to force women to bring pregnancies to term and things like that because they think that they're supporting or protecting the family. And that's just bad. It's just a bad way of looking at things. And so I really appreciated Henry Rollins's talk about that. He didn't shy away from opening the door on his skeletons in his family's closet, because there was a lot of them. And he told it in a funny way. I mean, you kind of laughed, and he kept telling he's like, I know I'm a terrible person for thinking that. He's not. He's normal. People have different relationships with their families all over the place. I know from personal experience, growing up, we'd go over to my grandma's house for Christmas and Thanksgiving every year. And there would be 20 people crammed into this small house, 1940s style house. And many of the adults smoked cigarettes, so the air quality was not good. Anyway, and so that's what we did every year. And the siblings in that family hated each other, kind of. They kind of hated each other, talked bad about them, talked behind their back. One of the husbands of one of my uncles, he married into the family, and my grandpa just hated his guts and talked bad about him, talked smack behind his back all the time. But that's what you did when you were a family, at least when I was a kid. You went to Grandma and Grandpa's house because they wanted you to come over to Grandma and Grandpa's house for holidays. And that's what you did. And you bit your tongue, and you waited till you got in the car when you're driving home, And then it would all come out. Well, so and so said this, and so did that, and it, it was just like, it's like Merry Christmas, it was just wild. And so eventually, my grandma passed away in 2008, and we have not had a family get together since then. My grandpa passed away in 2014, I believe it was. And we do not get together anymore at all. That core family does not get together anymore, ever, because they all hate each other's guts. They don't want to be in the same room with them. It's bad blood growing up. And that's just how some families are. And so, I grew up in that atmosphere, and it was always seemed wrong to me that you would hate your relatives so much that you didn't even want to be in the same room with them. I try to avoid that. I treat, and I might have talked about this before. When I was in college, somebody accused me of treating everybody the same. Because that's what I used to do. I used to treat everybody the same. Whether you are a friend of mine or not a friend of mine, it's like Henry Rollins talked about this too. Maybe if we're nicer to each other, things might be better in this world. And I'm not saying that you overlook bad stuff. Like if somebody's a child abuser or a husband cheats on a wife and you find out about it, you don't overlook bad stuff. It's just you put it in perspective and you try to work around the bad stuff that you can work around. Like maybe Uncle Gene, maybe he's just weird. So you just don't spend as much time. But if he calls up and says, hey, I've got a broken pipe, will you come over and help me? You go over and help. It's just I just have that where a lot of people in my family just don't talk to each other anymore. It's sad. It's sad. People, I get texts and they'll say, tell your mother this. And it's like, no, you tell my mom that. But they don't, because they don't talk to her. And it's just, yeah. But it was good to hear Henry talk about his family. Because that's how I feel, is that families are different, no matter where you're at or how they're not. The Brady Bunch, that was an aspirational thing. When people talk about nuclear families, that's aspirational. But the one thing you don't want to do is you don't want to force people to conform, because that's when you hurt people. It's like couples shouldn't be in a relationship if they're not happy. And if they're not happy, then they need to not be a couple anymore. That's just, and then some people will say, well, I had a child with this person, so we can't, we need to get married. Or no, you don't. That's society. That's a social construct. I was reading some religious conservative on Twitter the other day, talking about, they were complaining about abortion, and they're saying that, people think it's normal because society doesn't frown on it. And it's like, yeah, society still frowns on it. That's why we still debate abortion in this country. But it still doesn't matter. Your opinion does not matter what the decision a woman makes between her and her doctor. If you hate abortion, the old saw, if you hate abortion, don't have one. If you don't like drag queen shows, don't go to one. There's another bill that's going through the Ohio legislature that would limit drag queen performances. And I might have talked about this before, but it starts with the assumption that a drag queen performance is obscene. Just because it's a man dressed as a woman dancing and singing, they think that that's obscene because it's a man dressed as a woman. Not so much a woman dressed as a man, that they never hardly ever talk about that. They're always worried about the men that are dressed as women. And again, it's not, your opinion. Your opinion doesn't matter whether or not you think it's obscene. But we have that going on all the time. And so I really appreciate Henry Rollins' stories about family.
This is Glass City Humanist on WAKT Radio. For more information about the topics in this episode, please visit glasscityhumanist.show.
Here in Ohio, and I'm sure it happens in other states, they have a concept here called release time religious education. And what that means is that public schools are allowed to let public school students leave school during the school day to attend a Bible school class. Usually it's once a week for the whole year. And what they do is they have these outside groups start these Bible classes. They can't do it inside a public school. That's unconstitutional. But what they do is they set up like a nearby church or another building, and they recruit these students to come to it. And then they transport the students, either walk them or bus them to this off-campus location. They have their Bible school class. Then they get back on the bus or they walk back to school and continue with their school day. Now, as a humanist and an atheist, I find the whole concept offensive. You know, a public school should be for learning basic skills to start with: reading, writing, arithmetic. They should learn social studies. They should learn how they live in the world. Now, if they want to study religion, I don't have a problem with that being part of the social studies curriculum, where you study, you're like, Islam started with Muhammad, and Christianity started with Jesus, according to some records. And then you have the Quakers and the Amish, and you talk about it as a comparative thing. You talk about all the different religions that people have. You don't favor one over another, and you don't proselytize. You don't say, here's a Bible quote, and so it's true. You don't do that to public school students. And the reason why is because of past court cases where the U.S. Supreme Court has ruled that public school students are captive. They are required to be there. It's compulsory attendance laws that are constitutional. So they are forced to be in that classroom. And so because they are forced to be in that classroom, the school cannot preach to them, proselytize. They can't have Bible classes. They can't pray. That is to be left for the parents and at home and outside school, except for release time education classes. And what this is this is just an end around to the separation of church and state. This is the way that religious believers are trying to get religion back into the school systems. I almost framed it like they do. Religion was not removed from the school. What they removed from the school district was that the school district would coerce students to comply and conform and pray a certain sect, Christianity, mostly Christianity. Unless you're at a public school that are full of Catholics, then they would study Catholicism. If you want to go to a private school, you want to be homeschool and learn the Bible, more power to you. But in the public school, the school is supposed to be neutral when it comes to religion. And I know what you're saying. You're saying, but Doug, you get off for Christmas. You have Christmas pageants and all that stuff. Yeah, that's how it used to be. I don't think, knowing what we know now with the court cases and everything from the 40s onward, I don't think we would have, because a lot of these things are like traditions. This is stuff that was done in the early days, and nobody thought anything of it. And now if you try to get rid of it, people complain. It's kind of like the statues of Confederate generals. The Confederate generals should not have statues. They lost the war. The forts, the army forts being named after Confederate generals. You shouldn't be naming stuff after Confederate generals. They lost the war. But that's how they thought in the early 1900s when they put all this stuff up. If it was today, we would know not to do that. Anyway, so that's what a lot of these religious observances that we do in the public realm, that's how they got their start. They started a long time ago before most of us were born. And it just kind of gets endemic, and they just keep doing it and keep doing it. And then when you try to stop to do it, then people complain because it's tradition. All right. So these religious people try to do this end around to try to get religion back in the schools by setting up these Bible classes outside of school. Now here in Ohio, there's a major player that's called the LifeWise Academy. And it's strictly Christian based, and they have a lot of money that they spend on this, even though that they raise money locally. It's based on donations. The donations pay for teachers, pay for transportation, for location. And so what they do is they go into an area, it's supposed to be grassroots. And so you might have like a group of people, like 5 or 6 people in an area that want to bring it to their local school. So they'll form a committee and they'll get other people, volunteers to help out. They'll raise money, and then they'll go to the school district and try to get it approved. Now, according to Ohio law, school districts do not have to approve release time education, religious education classes. It is up to the school district whether or not to approve it. But most of these school districts, they just don't want to mess with it. They don't want, because they're going to get phone calls, they're going to get protests if they refuse. So a lot of times they cave and they approve it. Now, the other thing to remember too about these things is that the school district is not allowed to fund it. They are not allowed to promote it. The staff, the school district staff are not allowed to work on it. They're not allowed to recruit students. It's all up to the LifeWise Academy committee that forms, that are not made up of district personnel. But I have seen examples, many examples of school districts violating that policy. Either they promote it, like they have let them set up a table outside a school event, or they have the superintendent that promotes it and sends out an email to parents, or teachers try to get their kids to sign up. And there's just a lot of violations. Now, how you deal with those violations is normally you would file a lawsuit and go through the courts, and then the courts would say, that's illegal. Well, in this era of the Trumpian flip-flop on religious freedom, that's not a sure bet that a court's going to rule that it's unconstitutional or that it's illegal or violating anything. And so the other thing to remember too is if you file a lawsuit, you better get some other people with you, because it's going to be a lonely process for you. If you're a parent and you're just so fed up, you want to file a lawsuit, you better look for other people to go along with you. Trust me. It is a lonely existence to buck the majority religion in this country. You get death threats. Every case you can find where somebody complains about Christianity in the schools, you can also hear a story about a family being threatened with death. Because that's how good these Christians are, is they will threaten a family with death. They'll say, we know where your kids are. We know your house, your home address is blah, 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 blah. It's intimidation. People are going to say, well, Doug, they're not going to really kill them. Well, we also know that people complained about some kind of pizza conspiracy in Washington, D.C. That involved pedophilia, and some guy showed up at a pizza shop with a gun to deal with the pedophilia. So there's enough people that aren't very stable that will hear stuff like this and take it as gospel, pardon the pun, and people might get hurt. You know, you get a rock through your window, or maybe they set fire to your car. I mean, usually the stuff doesn't get that. But I mean, when we had abortion clinic bombings because somebody didn't want to go through the whole legal process of going to court, so they just decided to bomb these abortion clinics. So what I advise people when they tell me about these violations, any kind of church-state violation is, especially if it involves a public school, make sure it's an actual injury. Make sure that your child was actually forced or not forced to do something because of religion. Like the teacher said, you know, Billy, you need to go to this class. And if Billy didn't go to that class, then they got like a lower grade or ostracized or put in a room or something like that. There has to be a physical injury. You know, if it's something that they do that you just don't like, that's not going to, most courts won't do that. They don't do that anymore. They don't do feelings anymore, because it's just easier for them to rule against you unless there's an actual, you were forced to do something. Now, on the other side, if it's a conservative religious person complaining about their rights being violated, it's almost always a feeling. See, that's how it's flip-flopped since Trump got in office and replaced 3 of the Supreme Court justices. You know, before, secular people or people that wanted secular government could do something and based on a feeling, like it's made me feel like a second-class citizen. But now it's the religious conservatives that are doing that. So what I advise people to do before they get into this is document everything. If they're putting flyers in a book bag, take a picture of the flyer inside the book bag. If they're setting up a table, take a picture of it at the school. If they have posters up, take pictures of everything. Document everything. Talk to the school principal and note, you know, diary it out. Diarrhea? No. Write it all out, what happened. Then, if you don't get any satisfaction, go to the school board and do the same thing. Many school boards control what the public can say or when they can say it. So there might not be an opportunity for you to complain, but what you need to do is you should do this anyway. Keep track of what's on the agenda, and if there's any public speaking period, and then make sure it fits something that's on the agenda, because a lot of time it's not on the agenda, they're not going to let you talk about it. So send a letter to them with your issues, and maybe they might create an agenda item to speak to you. So do that, and then complain to the school board. If that doesn't help, go to the media. Write a letter to the editor. Call, if you have a TV station, call TV stations. Radio, do a press conference and highlight all these violations. A lot of times, a stiffly worded letter, threatening letter that you're going to go to court or something, usually they can get a public school to change their mind or to correct their behavior sometimes. If all that doesn't work, you know, try to find other parents that are also concerned. They don't have to be atheists or secularists. They could be Catholics. They could be Jewish. You know, because a lot of times these religious Bible schools is about Christianity, and it's about Protestant Christianity. So if you can find religious parents of religious, you know, that are different religions than Christianity, bring them on board. Then what you want to do then is you want to find a national group who can help you file a lawsuit. ACLU, the Freedom from Religion Foundation, American Humanist Association, they have a legal department. CFI, the Center for Free Inquiry, they have lawyers. Go to them and say, this is what's happening. This is the complaint. They'll write a letter. And in some cases, if they think you have a strong enough case, they will help you file lawsuits and they will defend you or represent you, or at least set it up to where you can find representation. Because filing a lawsuit, it may cost several $100s to file, but it costs more money as you move on, because you got to pay the lawyer. Every time the lawyer does work for you, you have to pay them. You have to pay copy prices to do discovery. If you do a Freedom of Information Act request at a public school for all their emails with LifeWise, they're going to charge you for printing those out. Because that's what they do. That's part of the intimidation. They don't want you to rock the boat. Some things that you don't want to do is you don't want to harass the staff. You don't want to harass the school principal or the school board. You don't want to what we call doxing. You don't want to publicize their home address and phone number and encourage people to call and visit them. You do not want to do that, because that sets you up for harassment charge. And that will not help your cause. Because the thing that really concerns me about the state's ability to approve these religious time outside the school is that there's really no enforcement mechanism. It says what the school can do, and you have some of the court cases, but it doesn't say, well, if a school violates this act, this is what you can do, because they didn't put it in. So it's gonna be a high hill to crest to get legal satisfaction. That's why I always encourage shaming them in the media, social media, protest at school board meetings if you have to. Just do it legally. Don't harass people. Don't confront them. Don't physically touch them or threaten them in any way. And then if people threaten you, make sure you record it if you can, and document every threat and call the police and fill out a police report, because you will get death threats depending on how religious the area is that you're fighting. So that's what I wanted to talk about today. And I am collecting some information about that. So I'm going to have a link up in the show notes. If you have a story about LifeWise in Ohio, if you know some violations that you've personally witnessed, or you would be interested in joining up to form a bigger group to go after these charlatans, let me know, and I'll put a link up to a form that you can fill out, and I'll get that information.
For more information about the topics in this episode, please visit glasscityhumanist.show.
As we move closer and closer to Election Day on November the 7th, the opponents of State Issue 1, which is the Reproductive Rights Amendment, are growing more desperate. I mean, they were already desperate, but they're even more desperate now. For example, they're trying to say that the language on the amendment is vague and it can be used for anything, and you could have an abortion up to birth. Isn't logically the same thing, because usually if you're going to abort a baby at birth, you're just going to give birth to the baby. A lot of the medical professionals, they'll want to bring the baby out into the world by that point. If it's been like 9 months and so many days, they don't abort a fetus unless there's like some medical necessity to do so, like maybe the baby's stillborn or the mother's going to die if you try to take the baby, whatever, but it's ultimately rare. Anyway, so they do that. The other thing that they do is former President Barack Obama did a social media blitz in support of State Issue 1, and they complained about outside people coming in and supporting it. Meanwhile, in their social media, they had a post by Tucker Carlson in opposition to State Issue 1. But, because it's somebody that's supporting State Issue 1, they are complaining about it. So anyway, I was not real shocked to see in the Toledo Blade a couple of weeks ago a letter from Bishop Thomas, Daniel Thomas. He's the bishop of the Toledo Diocese, because the Toledo media in general is deferential to the Catholic Diocese. So if he, because I think I might have said previously that when there was the debate over a transfer agreement, one of the trap laws against the local abortion clinic was that you had to have a transfer agreement with a local hospital, but it couldn't be a hospital that received state funding. It couldn't be a charity hospital, and how that was debated. And one of the local TV stations, Channel 11, gave the bishop 5 minutes to encourage the people listening to his editorial, quote unquote, to call up ProMedica and ask them not to enter into the transfer agreement, which they ended up doing. But the fact that the TV station gave him 5 minutes uninterrupted, without question. So, the Toledo media in general is deferential to the Catholic Church here because there's a lot of Catholics in Toledo. Anyway, so I wasn't surprised to see his letter. And so I had to send a letter in return, and it got published on Sunday, October the 22nd. And I kind of just wanted to read just a little bit from it. And this is from the letter that was published, my letter that was published. Bishop Thomas claims that the amendment rejects and disrespects the rights of women and girls of Ohio, the rights of parents, and the rights of the baby about to be born. I would argue letting the state police a basic human right to bodily autonomy is inhuman and undemocratic. I don't trust a bishop of the Catholic Church lecturing anyone about protecting children. The Church doesn't have a good track record on that issue. When it comes to issues involving medical treatment, I think the bishop needs to stay in his lane. But then, that is the reason for State Issue 1. So the state and the Church will stay out of people's reproductive choices. And I fully believe that the Catholic Church should not be lecturing people on the protection of children. It's kind of ironic and a little bit hypocritical that they refuse to get their house in order, but they want to lecture other people about how to protect children. Again, we have that election coming up in a week or so at the time this is being recorded, and I encourage everybody, no matter what your position is on these issues, to at least get out and vote. And that's the important thing.
For more information about the topics in this episode, please visit glasscityhumanist.show.
One of the things that I kind of wanted to do is talk about current events and try to put a humanist spin, spin's probably a bad word, but trying to apply our humanist values to a current event that's in the news. And one of the biggest stories so far of 2023 is the latest in a long line of conflict between Israel and the people of Palestine in the form of the terrorist group Hamas. A couple weeks ago, the terrorist group Hamas attacked Israel pretty significantly with rockets and infiltrators, and they killed hundreds, if not thousands, of Israelis. The Israelis, of course, retaliated by bombing the Gaza Strip, where millions of Palestinians are crammed into a area that's probably about the size of Manhattan Island, land-wise. And it's a very distressing time, a very, very distressing time, no matter what side you're on in this conflict. I'm not sure picking a side is appropriate, because, and I'll get to that here in a minute. But what I wanted to do before I get into this is I want to tell you, I am not an expert on the Middle East, okay? I don't consider myself an expert. The information I get, I've gleaned from reading articles by people that know more than I do, and following people on Twitter that know far more than I do. And I get my news sources for news that's going on there from people that I trust, that don't have an inherent bias in the reporting. So I'm not going to, and when I say I'm not going to take a side, all right, because when you get into a shooting war where you're bombing and rockets and attacking and bulldozing and tanks come in and innocent people die. And innocent people should not die. This is the conflict, the Palestinian or Israeli conflict, has been going on even longer than I've been alive. It flared up in the modern sense, what we see today, in the mid-40s after World War II. And what happened was, it actually goes back farther to World War I. During the time of World War I, the land that's considered where Israel is and Palestinians inhabit, where the Gaza Strip and the West Bank and everything, was under the Ottoman Turks, which were Muslim. That area was generally Muslim, Arab. There had been Jews there in ancient history, because if you read your Bible, if you know the Bible stories, you know that it was the Jewish people who betrayed Jesus. So, we're getting into some theology here. Because the historical record is shaky on this, but this is what the Bible says. Okay, so there was Jews there. They had a kingdom of Jerusalem. Jerusalem is a holy city, considered a holy city by Christians and Muslims. And so that's where you get the conflict. It's a religious conflict, mainly a religious conflict, or at least it's framed as a religious conflict between Islam and not Christianity, but Judaism, and a little bit of Christianity, because the history of that area also includes Christians during the Crusades. So, I'm going to stay on my lane on that one, but you can look that up. There's plenty of historical records about the Crusades. And that's where the Christians in the West wanted to save Jerusalem from the Saracens, the savages, the Muslims. And many rich kingdoms in Europe paid for soldiers to come to Palestine and try to win. It was a big history, but then the Ottoman Turks took over, became Muslim. Then after World War I, because it was previously a Jewish homeland where there was Jewish people living, the Jewish people, the intellectuals, the Zionists, wanted to take that homeland back. They wanted to inhabit it again, make it a home for Jews. So they had convinced the powers that be at the end of World War I to set aside Palestine for the Jews. Well, it really didn't happen. I know, this is a big topic. Trying to talk about a big topic like this in a relatively short period of time, it's not going to do it justice. But basically, the world has been pretty much anti-Semitic in history, throughout history. The Jews have been targets of racism and everything throughout history. One of the things, the Spanish Inquisition, if you look up the Spanish Inquisition, it was about converting Jewish people to Christianity. That was part of it. So these Jewish intellectuals, these Zionists, wanted to get a homeland for Jews where they could feel protected. And so they convinced the powers that be that won World War I to set aside Palestine for the Jews. Now they did that, but then they didn't help them get there. In fact, they tried to keep them from there because they also promised the area to the Arabs. Because that was part of the deal for them fighting the Ottoman Turks during World War I, that they would get the land back. So they made a side deal with the Arabs. So they, how the modern term is slow-rolled, allowing Jewish immigrants into Palestine. So then we have World War II and the Nazis and the Holocaust. And Ken Burns did an excellent recent documentary about the United States' response to the Holocaust when it was actually happening. You better check it out because it shows how anti-Semitic the world was, even then. Even after they found out about the Holocaust, and they knew about the Holocaust early on, they still did not come through for Jewish people. They still slow-rolled it. They dragged their feet, kicking and screaming, And so after World War II, the Zionists decided, we're taking this land. It was promised to us. We're taking it. So they mass immigrated in there. A lot of them were soldiers during World War II. They got guns, and they started violently trying to take the land. At the time, it was under the control of the British. They had control of that area all the way from World War I through the creation of the State of Israel, which happened in 1948. Then you had the first Israeli-Palestinian War, because you had all the Arabs in the area that tried to wipe out the Jewish state, the non-assessant Jewish state that had just formed. But like I said, a lot of these Jewish people that came to Palestine at that time were war veterans. They knew how to fight, and they fought, and they had the weapons to do it, and they hung on. So the state of Israel is established. All that time, from the 1948 until the present, certain factions of Arabs have been trying to eliminate Israel in one form or another. You've had many different Israeli wars, Palestinian-Israeli wars, Arab-Israeli wars. You had the 6-Day War, and a lot of the times Israel has won, most of the time. One of the things that they did in the last real big war was they seized the West Bank of the Jordan River and the Gaza Strip, which were promised to the Palestinians. When they finally decided that Israel was going to stay, they needed to try to set aside land for Palestinians. So the other thing that the Israelis have done since then is they believe that they should have all of that land, the West Bank, the Gaza Strip, everything. And and one of the things that they've been doing is they've been trying to colonize these areas. And what they do when they do that is they come in and they bulldoze Palestinian houses, they confiscate their property, and then they build Jewish settlements. That doesn't seem fair. It's not fair. It's not fair, but that's what they do. The other thing they did was they forced all millions of Palestinians into that small area of the Gaza Strip. And they limit their ability to move, to travel. They have military guarding the access points to the Gaza Strip. They control who gets in and gets out. The Israelis control the water, the electricity, and the gas. And so effectively, it looks like it's a prison compound. So, with that being in mind, that they treat these Palestinians like second-class citizens, uh, it brings to mind apartheid in South Africa, when the white minority tried to control the black majority. Now, I'm not saying number-wise that there's more Palestinians than Jewish people or whatever, but you have a government, a sovereign government, doing everything it can to discriminate against a subgroup of people that actually live there, that should be there equally, with equal rights and land and being able to hold land and all that stuff. And so during these conflicts and everything that's been going on, they've been trying to solve the problem, solve the conflict. And one of the things that they were talking about was creating a two-state solution, where you have half this Palestine area for Jewish people and half for Palestinians, like real and access to Jerusalem. So Jerusalem would be like a free city, access to everybody. And the Israelis would have defense, they would cover defense, and they would have, and the Palestinians would have to agree to not try to kill Israelis. They've been trying to do this for many years, and it just keeps falling apart, mainly because a lot of the more right-wing governments that Israel has had this idea that all this land belongs to us, and we're going to take it. And they have not come back from doing all these settlements, where they confiscate land, bulldoze the houses, and build Israeli settlements. So I was not surprised when Hamas attacked. Now again, Hamas is a terrorist organization. They control a lot of the things that goes on in the Gaza Strip. And the reason why they control stuff in the Gaza Strip is because these Palestinians have been treated so shabbily, they are desperate. And so they will latch on to anybody that offers to fight for them and try to better their situation. So they're going to support Hamas. And you see this in history. When you have a group of people that is being oppressed, they tend to latch on to terrorists or authoritarian figures. Whether or not the oppression is real or just in their heads, that's what they'll do. So these Palestinians have allowed Hamas to be in existence and to operate in their area. All right. So then the Israeli army retaliates. And when they retaliate, it's like a bulldozer to kill a housefly. And they bomb the crap out of areas. Now, don't get me wrong, Hamas is also one to put their assets within civilian areas, like the hospital that in the news that was recently people accused Israel of bombing, and it turns out more than likely it was a Hamas rocket that exploded prematurely. They had those weapons at a hospital, and that's what terrorist groups do. I mean, it's not any different than any other terrorist group. We saw that with the Iraq War and Saddam Hussein and the human shields. Do a Google search on human shields. They had this command and control center in the same building that they had a bomb shelter in Baghdad. And so the Air Force, the U.S. Air Force or the Allied Air Force, bombed the crap out of that building and killed many innocent people. What I want to point out is that, we see President Biden and people, officials of the government, like Alexander Blinken, the Secretary of State, and some other people standing with Israel. And it makes people on the progressive side, on the left side, upset because they support the Palestinian people, not Hamas. See, that's what right-wingers do, is they say Hamas is the same as the Palestinian people. And it's not. It's not the same thing. Hamas is a terrorist organization that they're basically holding the Palestinians hostage or using them as shields while they bomb Israel. But then Israel plays into that game by bombing the crap out of the Gaza Strip area, and killing many innocent Palestinians. So then the Palestinians get pissed off, and then they support Hamas more, and it just cycles, a vicious cycle. So what I want to say here as a humanist is you can support Israel's right to exist. Israel has a right to exist. But you can also complain about Israel treating the Palestinian people like crap, just because they're Palestinian people who may or may not support Hamas. You know, holding them in an area that's basically a prison and controlling their lives and not allowing them equal access to the country, the rest of the country, or equal opportunity to participate in the government. That's just wrong. And I'll tell it, I have many Jewish friends. I love them dearly. I even am a little bit Jewish, according to Ancestry.com, like less than 1%, just a smidge. And you know, I'm there. The Holocaust happened. It was awful. The world was very anti-Semitic. It still is in some parts. And government screwed up during World War II and didn't let more Jewish immigrants in. There's a lot of amends that non-Jewish people need to help out with. But again, the Jewish government needs to change how they're dealing with the Palestinian people. They need to stop the settlements, and they need to solve this land problem that they have. And until they do, we're just going to see this cycle of violence constantly. And it's just going to be exhausting. It's already exhausting, and it hasn't even lasted that long. So that's all I wanted to say about the current Palestinian-Israeli conflict and the Middle East in general. It is religiously based, and it's also politically based. And that's what you get when you have religions that can't stand each other.
Thank you for listening. For more information about the topics in this episode, please visit glasscityhumanist.show. Glass City Humanist is an outreach of the Secular Humanists of Western Lake Erie. Sholi can be reached at humanistswle.org. Glass City Humanist is hosted, written, and produced by Douglas Berger, and he's solely responsible for the content. Our theme music is Glass City Jam, composed using the Amplify Studio. See you next time.